Phil Chung with Mile High United Way. I'm the Senior Director of Evaluation and Learning, and we're here today to discuss Asian American Pacific Islander issues and to celebrate the beauty of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and discuss the issues and challenges that are facing us today.
Hi, my name is Fran Campbell, and I'm the current President and CEO of the Asian Chamber of Commerce. And we have just recently partnered with Mile High United Way to outreach to our community as well as Asian American small businesses.
Hi, I'm Charles Ozaki. I sit on the board of Mile High United Way, and I'm also on a committee addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the future of Mile High United Way.
I'm Filipino.
I'm Korean.
Japanese.
Okay. The reason I ask is because this is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we talk about why that came about and why do we have a month just for our community. It commemorates the first Japanese to come to the United States, who happened to be, his name was John Manjiro, and he was 14 years old. I think it was like in 1843 or something like that. And he was on a whaling ship and is shipwrecked. And so he was swimming for his life, and he was picked up by another whaling ship. And the captain of that was from New England, and brought him to New England and eventually adopted him. And he became officially known as the first Japanese to come to the United States. So the month is for him, as commemorating him, as well as the transcontinental railroad workers, which we all know, the Chinese workers. They were not treated well. They were ignored when the transcontinental railroad was completed to great acclaim across the country. They were not even included in the ceremony or in the pictures or anything. One of the interesting things I think that's important is most people don't know that in Denver there actually was a Chinatown. It was really quite big and very thriving. It was at about where Coors Stadium sits today. And on, let me see the date, Halloween of 1880, there was what started out as a small bar fight there in Chinatown, became a huge riot, and by the next morning there was nothing left of that Chinatown. They had, that whole, it was like a mile square area, and they had temples and restaurants and markets, but people in the town who did not like them there, calling them, the yellow peril, and they're taking our jobs away, kind of something we hear today. They would spread the false news that, all they have there is brothels and opium dens. But no, that wasn't true. There was families, and they had homes there, and they were worshiping there and working there. But by the next day, there was nothing left. The only thing that exists today is catty corner to Coors Stadium at 19th and 20th. There's a bar, and on the wall of that bar, there is a plaque that says, "Here was Hop Alley," is what they called it. Although the residents didn't call it Hop Alley. That's kind of a derogatory term. Here's Hop Alley, and this is what happened here, and that's all that exists.
My family moved to Colorado from California in the early 90s. And so I've been in and out of Colorado for 30 years, and this is the history and information that I had certainly not been exposed to in any way. How long have you been in Colorado?
I was born and raised here in Colorado.
How about you, Charles?
Since I was born, 1949. As you were talking, it was bringing to mind, the history of the Japanese in Colorado, and I think there's a shared history with the Chinese workers. At some point, Japanese workers were brought to the United States as contract laborers, and that's how they got to the United States as well as to Colorado. And they worked on the infrastructure projects similar to what you were saying, maybe local railroads, as well as the major ditch systems, especially in northern Colorado. And so there's a there's a big ditch that goes from the east side or the west side of the Continental Divide, north of the town of Grand Lake. Okay, and it comes across the Continental Divide, brings West Slope water into the East Slope, the biggest ditch from days past. And many of the workers who dug that ditch by hand were Japanese workers. Just as you were saying that there was a Chinatown at one time in lower downtown Denver. Japantown was created in lower downtown Denver after World War II. And the primary reason for that was people who needed a place to live after World War II, who were released from the camps. The only place that they could live in Denver was in that area and the nearby areas, which were regarded as the red line areas of Denver, where minorities were allowed to live. Okay, but and redlining has a lot of other connotations subsequently, but and so Japanese Americans settled in those neighborhoods after World War II.
So is that where Sakura Square stands today?
Yeah. And so there was the Japantown in Denver stretched from about 18th along Larimer all the way to around 27th.
Wow.
And there were a number of businesses that were concentrated along that area, and people who a lot of Japanese Americans lived in that, from downtown all the way over into Curtis Park and Five Points and Rhino, and that's where they all were, because they couldn't live anywhere else.
Right. Well, my parents came, they were both from the Philippines. They met in California. My father, who went to Cal Poly and got his engineering degree out there, wasn't allowed to have a job anywhere in California at the time because he wasn't a citizen yet. But Samsonite, which was, Samsonite, like they had a big plant here. Do you remember that? So that's why they hired my dad, and that's why they came out here. But they came out here and there was no Asians. Nobody, they couldn't find it. They actually thought they'd come out here and find people with cowboy hats, and horses and stuff. But there was absolutely no Asians until somebody told them to go to Sakura Square. And I don't know if that's what it was called then or if it was called Japantown, but this was like 1959, 1960. It's the only place that they saw people that looked like them, the only place they could find the food that they wanted, the only place that they eventually found other Filipinos was there. And it was like a life-saving thing for them. They when they realized that was there, that they could stay here.
Like when my parents immigrated, not to Colorado, but they came in the early to mid 70s to Chicago, and at that time I think in the mid 70s, there were a lot more opportunities, or they were opening up more visas for East Asians to come to America, and so they came to America, or they came to Chicago, and they were professionals in their own country, but they had to sort of restart their careers in a lot of ways. My dad, for the first 3 or 4 years, he was a garage mechanic basically, and they were living in the basement of this small little house for 3 or 4 years. And they, I have an older sister, and she's 4 years older than me, but when they came here, they actually left my older sister with one of my parents' siblings, so they could establish a bit of a life here and get a job, and then bring my sister over here. And so when I think about all the hard work and sacrifices and the opportunities that they gave up to come here and to sort of start over and try to find another community like themselves here, it just kind of blows my mind in a lot of ways.
It's impressive, but it's also scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
How they could have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah. My parents owned a dry cleaners,
My parents owned a liquor store.
See, my parents owned a dry cleaners at 12th and Elizabeth, right by the Botanic Gardens. But they didn't go into that to make big money. They went into it to send all the kids to college.
Yeah.
And once all the grandkids went to college, they sold it. That was the only reason. So for 30 some years, they didn't vacation together because somebody always had to be at the shop. I'm sure, just like another store. You know, they hired almost every Filipino kid they knew to work there. And that's how they do business. So when I talk to other business owners in like the city and stuff, I need to remind them that the reason that new immigrants, especially Asian immigrants, go into this isn't really just to get rich, it's to take care of their family, just like the early immigrants did.
And so that reminded me that in my parents, we had kind of a special story where they weren't Japanese Americans. Okay, they were Japanese living in Lima, Peru before World War II. And then my father was kidnapped by the United States government, brought to the United States, and held as like a prisoner. And he had nothing to do with government of Japan or anything like that. He was just living as an immigrant in Peru, along with 2,000 others, Japanese. And those people were all brought to the United States and held, kind of like as hostages. And so when he came after the war, and he and my mother and brothers and sisters when they were released, they came to Denver. My father and mother only spoke Japanese and Spanish.
Yeah.
They didn't speak any English, and they came, and so they had to, make do. And they were able to get some jobs, kind of in the neighborhood, which was great. That there were people, willing to do that, but they ultimately had to create a means to send their kids to college, which was
Right.
run a grocery store and my father was also a gardener, so he mowed lawns, and so but they were able to do that.
That's
To create the base on which all the kids could go to college, and I believe all the other families in the neighborhood, not just the grocery store owners, but all the other families in the neighborhood who had that same goal, which was great.
It's a different way of thinking, of doing business. It really is, and it still is.
Yeah.
After the Chinese Exclusion Act, that's when the United States, we need cheap labor. So that's when they brought in Japanese and Filipinos and South Asians. Filipinos were treated really super bad out in California. Just as bad as the Chinese were. But I think they were kind of given a pass eventually because the Philippines was a territory of the United States at that time. The United States won them during the Spanish-American War. But why did they come to Colorado is because, they were treated so bad, and here in Colorado they weren't treated as bad. They were allowed to own property. They were allowed to go to school. At that time, they still couldn't apply to be citizen, but they could still be more of a contributing member of society. And then with the South Asians also came here, for the same reason. But they didn't come to Colorado in big populations until after that 1965 Immigration Act during President Johnson's time, which finally got rid of the quota for immigration. But they came here for education and tech jobs. Same with the Korean population came here after that. And then we had the refugee communities that have been coming here, for quite a while. Since after the Vietnam War, of course, is when we had the Vietnamese, Laotian, Hmong tribe come, and then the refugees that we have now, which are from Burma and Bhutan. So there are, if you want to talk about the history of all of the Asians that came to Colorado, they all come here for the same reason. There's opportunity here.
Yeah, I think one of the things that always kind of makes me think or strikes me is, and obviously Asian Americans are, and like you described it, like it's almost a two-sided coin when you're talking about Asian Americans. Like it's an easy way to sort of capture a very, very diverse, non-monolithic population with very different histories, very different experiences, even both from the country you're from, but also generationally as well. And so it's a challenge in a lot of ways, but it's also an opportunity for like us coming from different backgrounds and different experiences. We have some shared experiences, but we also have some very different experiences as well.
Yeah, we're not all Chinese,
Right.
you know, which is the easiest way to think of Asians. I hate that.
So while our families, you know, have worked to succeed, you know, in this environment, I think there's this idea of a model minority, which is, you know, on the one hand, it's good that different groups, you know, work amongst themselves in their own families to be successful and to become more educated and create more opportunities to become successful. But on the other hand, there are systemic barriers, okay, that continue to exist, that suppress the ability to succeed in today's America. And so this idea of model minority, yeah, you can get you know, you can get a ways, but then there's a systemic barrier that has created ceilings for diverse people in this country, and that includes Asians. It's a challenge for everybody.
It is, I think, and you mentioned it, yes, people may look at the Asian community and say, oh wow, they all got great educations because our parents worked so hard to make sure we went to college, and they're all making good money and have the good smartphones and the cars and everything, but we're not all of the same, just like you said, we're not all of the same experience. There are the refugees, the new immigrants, that they, you know, we're not all up here. It's quite a differing degree of economic and cultural status. And what happens is, because we are the model minority, you know, we get ignored because why pay attention to them? They're so good, right? We get ignored, and what happens when we get ignored is we don't get the funding. You know, the color that really matters, I always like to say, is green. We all need green. But when they look at our communities, they don't take into account those in our community that really need help. So we don't get funding like that. You know, for a long time, DPS schools categorized Asians with the Latino. We were all in that same group. So they would get the money for the Latino students, but none for us. None for us. And the model minority myth is it just, I don't think there's anything good coming out of that. It just divides us. It just makes other minority groups angry at us, which I think is what it was meant. And then it just makes, you know, the population that's in the majority right now to just ignore us, to ignore what we do.
Yeah, and I think to your point around funding, but also I think about systemic change. I think about political representation. And I think even though there's, over the last probably 10, 15 years, there's been a growing increase of Asian Americans taking on and having more of a political role, whether that as formal elected officials or, and I think, you know, one of the heartening things in some respects about what we're seeing nowadays with all the violence taking place and sort of more tension is that more people are being activated and mobilized to use an advocacy voice. But I think to your point, like that, you know, there are times when I step into a room for the first time with non-Asians and others, that in the back of my head I have that idea of like that model minority myth idea of the perceptions that people
This
have
is how
of
they're
me
gonna
just
see.
based on my background or the way I talk or the role that I play. And I don't think any of us are representative of any monolithic or individual. Like I'm not representative of all Koreans, but I think one of the dangers of the model minority myth is that people see you as representative completely of an entire population, or even of 50 populations, 50 countries that comprise Asian Americans, and then you mask over and you kind of erase over all of the complexity and nuance and challenges. I was reading I think there was a report came out last year that in New York, like in some of these large metropolitan cities where you have a large Asian American population, but in New York, I think the Asian American population was the population that has the greatest income disparities amongst all people of color. And so, but no one's really seeing that because they're not looking at the information or disaggregating
They're just
the data.
looking at the Asians
They're
at the
looking
top.
at it exactly. But if you just dig deeper, you see like that's actually the population that has the most income disparity.
It is. That's what makes it hard. I think too that the model minority myth is, it feeds a lot into the anti-Asian violence that's going on right now. But I think because of what happened last summer with the racial reckoning for Black Lives Matter, our voices are bigger now. And I think this is the great time. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of Asian Americans having a bigger voice in politics. We're still kind of cut out of the big corporate executive jobs, I think, but maybe that's coming.
What did you both, I'm just curious, what did you both think when a lot of this violence started becoming more public? And I think between 2019 and 2020, there was this huge, like 150% increase in reported hate incidents. I'm just curious, what was your reaction or your experience when all of that was happening?
So I remember Vincent Chin.
Yeah.
Okay, which for those people who younger people may not know the story, but there was a time when Japan really grew in their economic footprint, and the manifestation of that and the impact on this country was Japanese car manufacturers were competing and beating American car manufacturers in the American market and in the world. And so there was a lot of resentment about Japanese economic success, and it turned into a racist manifestation in some communities in our country. And there was a Chinese gentleman who was mistaken for a Japanese person who was brutally killed because of his race, and was because of this resentment of Japan. And that carried over to Asians in the United States. And so it's not the first time that Asians have had to face concern and fear. But this last year has really brought it back.
What I want people to know is that it isn't just happening in New York and San Francisco and LA, it's happening here. Some of the scary stuff that's happened within 2 miles of where I live in Lakewood. It scared me. It got to the point where I don't go to the grocery store without my husband. He's white. But I feel safer if he's with me. Because I know that the grocery store that's right near me, 2 women of Japanese heritage, one was yelled at, "Go back to where you came from," and she's like, "Where's that? Montbello." And the other one was spit on, which is an assault, and we've been hearing that a lot. Pacific Mercantile, Jolie has had her windows, rocks thrown through her windows. It's just too close to home, and I don't like it. I don't like it. But we do have advocates. Governor Polis was one of the first advocates to come out. Because one of the things that has also affected is small businesses, our Asian small businesses. You know, even before the shutdown, they had people started thinking, well, I'm not going to go to that restaurant. They get their food from China. And it's not true. You know, they may be bat infested, you know. So all of those Chinese restaurants in our, like in Little Saigon Business District and in Aurora, even throughout the state, people stopped going because of that idiotic, you know, rhetoric that was going on. And so now when our businesses are trying to recover, just like every other businesses, they are so far behind and just barely hanging in there. But how did they hang in there? It's just probably like your parents did at the liquor store and mine did. They hire all the kids to work for them for free.
Oh yeah.
They do a lot of
every college break,
yeah,
winter.
that's right.
I'm there in the freezer restocking.
And payroll comes under the table in cash, you know, and instead of going to the primary lenders for capital, they're going to grandpa and great aunt for that money to get us through to the next time. That's how they're hanging on, but that can't last. That can't last.
Yeah, like when all the violence started happening, or when it became more public, I should say. You know, my first thought was very personal, sort of, because it's with elderly men and women,
Yes,
and people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and honestly, like the only word I could think of was like cowardice. I mean, like how cowardly is that? And I was immediately thinking about my mother, who lives by herself and is in her late 70s. I'm like talking to her and saying, like,
is she here?
She lives down in Castle Rock.
Okay.
And so she doesn't go out much, but I mean, obviously because of the pandemic, but even to the extent of it was all at that time, I was, be careful if you do go out. You need to get that, let me go get that for you.
Drive it down.
So you don't have to, just because of this sense of fear, which I had never felt before for any of my parents in my lifetime up to this point. You know, I know certain, you know, populations have their own months in a lot of ways, and I think for AAPI communities, I mean, this, especially what's been going on lately, I mean, I hope it doesn't just become a celebration or recognition or acknowledgement in this month, but becomes more of a movement moving forward.
Exactly.
And so how do we take it from being just a month to a movement? And I think there's more energy, and I hope there's more energy to be able to take what we've learned and what we're learning over the last year plus, what's been going on in this country, and actually begin to activate folks and educate policymakers like you're doing, and to work with other organizations or systems to be able to educate them and to be able to create more opportunities, so that it's not something that just happens in May, but it's something that we need to be doing systemically.
And that, you know, when you talk about systemic, that actually means our schools. Our kids need to learn this. You know, it probably won't happen in my generation or your generation, but our kids need to learn this in school. So just having 1 month isn't enough. It needs to be in their textbooks. I didn't know about internment camps until I was an adult. And I've lived in Denver all my life. Why didn't I know that? You know, I didn't know about Chinatown until I started working with the Asian Chamber. That was just like 7 years ago. Why weren't we taught that if we were born and raised here in Denver? So I think that's where it has to start. And talk about a hill to climb.
Yep.
That's going to be tough. But I'm hoping, you know, all of our political advocates that we have right now, just because they're mandated to work with us, I hope they don't forget us next year. You know, and the year after, and the year after. I hope they're not just checking a box.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
So there's a reckoning that is coming.
Right.
Okay. And the reckoning is that our population in the United States is changing.
That's right.
Okay.
That's the reckoning.
And it's diversifying. And it is going to happen, and that because of that, you know, just day-to-day life is going to be affected by that, by everybody. Everybody's day-to-day life eventually will be affected by that. And so
That's scary for some people. I think.
Yeah, I believe
I think
that may be the case.
That's
for a
why
lot
this
of
is
people.
happening.
Yeah,
They want to
because
stop
change is well, if they're not aware of it now, they will be
Mhm.
in the future, and then it could have a different impact on in terms of fear of change in the future for the majority community.
which
Right.
by 2025 will be people of color.
Yep.
And I think, and Asian Americans will be the largest immigrant group in the United States.
Yeah,
I think that scares people.
yeah.
That's why we're seeing this.
Where's my whiskey?
So and so, but it doesn't hurt to talk about it
No.
as much as possible, so that that we can have a more shared awareness of how things are changing. But it doesn't mean it's a bad change. Okay,
No.
in my mind, it's a good change.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so.
But I still work with a lot of Asian communities that still get that thing where they're being gaslighted into thinking that they're wrong, into thinking that, oh, you're just being too sensitive. We're just joking. We're crying out loud, and that's the way a bully talks to a little kid, but that's the way these bullies are talking to us as adults. And I don't, I think I'm hoping that the violence starts trending downwards. But as soon as, as early as just last month, we've been seeing and hearing things. So as our community starts opening up and trying to recover, I do have hope that we can recover from that. But, not if people are telling us we're being too sensitive.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. That's just garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious, we talked a little bit about, like, what gives you hope, like, in terms of what could be, like, now that we're kind of in a very unique, and for me at least, it feels like a little bit of a different moment, at least in terms of my own experience. But I'm just curious, what gives you hope for moving forward?
That we can talk like this, that there are more and more conversations like this happening. Like I said, I was born and raised here in Denver, and I've never seen this much attention put onto our community ever. But the good part of it is we could take that attention and turn it around and discuss things just like this.
Yeah, and the fact of the attention occurring is a good thing in my mind.
Right.
Because it forces the issue into the public eye, and maybe the impact of that is it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The common belief is that it's wrong, and it can't happen, shouldn't happen.
Right.
And I think in addition to being in the public eye, I hope that it's also a bit in the private eye. So it's happening in conversations that are in people's homes that maybe wouldn't engage in these types of conversations, wouldn't think about these issues before. But now, because it's become more public, they're becoming more aware, they're becoming hopefully more educated, they're being able to talk more fluently about some of these issues because they're more aware and they're more educated. And so for me, part of the hope comes in that it's unearthing things that have been around for a very long time. Issues and challenges have been around for a very long time, but hopefully some of these, their conversations are happening at the dinner table as well as in front of the Capitol.
Yeah, I like that. Even in Asian homes, because I know that, like, my parents' generation, they would never talk about this.
Right.
What happened in the war, we're not going to talk about this. What happened during the Vietnam War, we're not going to talk about this. And I think now, just the reckoning of it, everybody has to talk about it, no matter what generation. And I'm hoping, especially the kids, when they have questions, that somebody's answering. I also volunteer with a group that does a lot of work with adopted kids from Asia. And they have actually had a really hard time with this because there is not really a community that they can go to because the parents may be white. They're not quite connected to the ethnic community, yet they are the ones that are being spit on just as much as everybody else. So they're having a hard time too. So, you know, that conversation has to go to all of the Asian community.
When I was growing up, there was a lot of pressure on me to assimilate.
Yeah.
And so eventually we were able to move from the red line area into the suburbs, which was part of a lot of different families. We're doing that for different reasons. Mine was to get closer to a grocery store that my parents bought in North Denver, Northwest Denver. And so, you know, and so there was a lot of that to be able to live and work in the white world.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was a big emphasis of succeeding in doing that.
Did you ever, you know, I was white at school, but Asian at home.
Yeah.
So there was two of me,
Yeah.
you know, and never the two met.
Yeah.
You know, that's just how I had to grow up.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying and
Yeah.
empathize. And I think, like, for me, it was like school was a place where, like, my parents were like, okay, like, I didn't speak English. This is what my parents told me. I didn't speak English until I started like formal school. I
Right.
spoke Korean the entire time, and then I actually completely lost all my Korean because I was just so
Yeah.
you had to learn English. You had to learn English. But like like when I go to school, you sort of have to. There's a sense of, I don't know if it's pressure or if it's expectation or just a thought when you're a kid that you have in your head. You want to fit in as a kid anyway.
Right.
So the whole language and culture kind of takes second place. And that was when I was growing up, and I'm really seeing that kind of in the younger generations, a really strong interest in recapturing capturing that, the cultural roots that that they come from, and actually wanting to share that, not just for themselves, but with the general public, which is a great thing, that's going on. So I think that's what I see as a real positive thing that's happening more and more, and as the population expands.
Now, I know you born and raised in Denver, so you probably remember. I started going to middle school when busing started. Remember that? That was forced segregation. No, forced integration. Where kids from Montbello were brought down to Southeast Denver, and Southeast Denver kids had to go to school in West Denver. It was an experiment in civil rights and integration. It didn't work. But I remember at my school that was a really tough time because I still went to a school where there were no Asians. It was just me. So who do I fit in with? Do I fit in with the white kids or the black kids or the Latino kids? I didn't know. And that's why trying to find out who you were was so hard at that time. But you're right. I think kids nowadays, they're more proud of that. The diversity. Because we're having conversations like this, the diversity that they're going to be able to experience is going to be great. And I'm glad for that, just like you said.
Yeah, and the more that's shared openly in a welcoming way with everybody, the larger community,
Right.
then I think the more understanding can be achieved.
And I think to your point, how sort of younger generations and sort of the youth of today are really sort of taking a more active role in understanding their own history. You know, I've learned a lot about my own history just in this conversation here, and just sort of Asian history here. But it's like there are situations where so I have two nieces who live in Southern California. One's a sophomore in high school, the other is in 8th grade, and you know, over the last year, they've become more aware and more kind of vigilant of both their own heritage. And so my sister's obviously Korean, and my brother-in-law is white, and so they come from a mixed race background, and so they've become more aware and more vigilant and understanding of their own heritage, and sort of wanting to learn more about that, because over the and they're teaching me things too that based on their own experience that I would never experience.
Well, they had that advantage of social media, right?
Yeah.
Because when we were going to school, I didn't know that there were other Asians in Denver. I didn't know that unless it was Sunday and we went to Sakura Square.
Exactly.
But now, you know, they can find other Asians everywhere, you know? So, just by social media, so that's something that helps.
Absolutely.
So the big challenge is, you know, the melting pot of America. How does it become better and more supportive of everybody going forward?
And that the big message for everybody today is just to be kinder, just to be more respectful of everybody, and I think we're moving towards that, but we really came from an ugly place the last 2 years. I mean, it wasn't just because of COVID. It was just everybody's fear of each other. You know, that's quite an ugly place. So hopefully the message, just being kinder, hopefully that goes forward.
Yeah. And it this last year, you know, has been really, I think it's been transformative, you know, for a lot of people. You know, some more than others, and maybe some not at all. But you know, you know, during the Derek Chauvin trial, you know, they talked about the family, George Floyd, and the daughter. You know, how she was proud of her father for helping change the world. You know, it's an interesting. I think I really never felt as strongly about you know the social change and society's change. Never more strongly than this past year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And
Yeah.
even the riots, or not
Right.
riots, the
Yeah.
protests that we had here.
Right.
In Denver.
And I understood that as people really empathizing with suffering
Right.
and wanting to change. Change kind of, you know, they want to change. People want to change the world so that wouldn't happen in the future. And so that was, of course, I also grew up in the 60s when women marched against the Vietnam
Sure.
War and things like that
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
But it was an important thing to happen, you know, for our society to progress,
Right.
to get better, and this whole idea of you know how we all impact each other, and how certain people can impact each other, you know, more than others in a negative way, and how that's not appropriate, that's not just. And
But we're all
shouldn't
working
happen.
together now.
Yeah, but that understanding that, you know, these, and go back to the word systemic, right? These systemic things that exist in our society need to change so that we don't hurt each other. And I don't think people want to do that. They don't purposely want to go out and hurt each other, right?
But if they're scared, people
Yeah,
do. People
right.
do ugly
Yeah.
things when they're scared.
Yeah.
When the Black Lives Matter movement started in early summer last year, what I found so astonishing and so validating was that there were other communities that also supported Black Lives Matter, and that the Black Lives Matter community supported us, the Asian community, especially now they are. But we received support from the Jewish community, the African community, the Black American community, Hispanic community. You know, and I think that's a result of Black Lives Matter, is that it isn't just one ethnic race that's doing it now. We all have big voices. And that's why this Asian hate, you know, yeah, it's ugly, but this is the biggest voice we've ever had.
Yep.
I know that is true here in Denver, you know.
And that's why it's important to keep the focus on other communities as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
Right, keep bringing other
Yeah,
communities in.
all the communities that are impacted.
Right. I think COVID actually, the Colorado Department of Health and Public Health and Environment, right? When the vaccine came out, they came out with special grants for minority communities to set up their own vaccine sites. And the fact that that was picked up by so many ethnic communities around the Denver area, and they didn't just restrict it to, oh, you're Filipino and only Filipinos can come. Oh, you're not Mongolian, you can't come to this. It's for everybody, but it was the ethnic communities through CDPHE that put that out. So I think that's great. I think one thing I'm really looking forward to, there's a couple of things, that Fort Amachi is going to be a historical site. I think they're working on that. And I know that hopefully is gonna come pretty soon. And also they're restoring, re-envisioning Chinatown, bringing that back, like I said earlier. So those are things to look forward to. Koreatown's coming in Aurora on South Havana.
Yep.
They're working on that. Asian Chamber hopes to be part of all of those things. So I'm sure Mile High United Way could be part of all of those things.
Yeah, I was just
too.
going to mention Koreatown
Uh-huh.
and Aurora. I think like one of the things I'm looking forward to is
It almost is already.
yeah, it's sort of, it is a pseudo go down
Yeah.
Havana. It is kind of a pseudo
yeah.
Koreatown, but to have like a formal, like a space, a physical
Right.
space to be
Right.
able to gather and be recognized
Mhm.
too and be acknowledged. I think that's one of the things, you know, I think throughout this past year plus, I think the thing that both I'm looking forward to and gives me hope, and sort of as I think about my own personal and professional life, is just the opportunities and the dialogue and the conversation that is happening now and that needs to continue to happen moving forward, and being able and having conversations with people who I'd never had conversations with before,
Agree.
and being able to tell them my story, but also listen to their story and listen to their questions. And so that's something that both excites me and makes me look positively towards the future.
So in terms of the Japanese American community, the kind of the focus on Sakura Square
Right.
is coming.
Yeah.
The reason Sakura Square was originally created was it was a consolidation of what I was saying earlier. There was a kind of a Japantown, and then Denver decided in their ultimate wisdom to do urban renewal, which basically wiped out Japantown and only concentrated it into Sakura Square. And so now the time has come to really look at renewing Sakura Square.
Right.
And so that'll become a focus for the future, and you know, when the factors come together to be able to do that. But the idea is there that it wants to continue, and you know, still be that place where people can go to get connected in the future. So.
Well, we also have Little Saigon, which is on Federal between Alameda and Mississippi, and a little bit east of Federal too. But that's also supposed to be a cultural destination. Former Councilman Paul Lopez, like 15 years ago, when he was councilman there, that was his vision, that that area would be a cultural destination, that when people get off a flight at DIA and they say, hey, where's a good place to go to get pho? You know, well, go to Little Saigon. And it's just now coming together where the communities and the businesses there are getting together to do that business improvement district, just like South Havana Business Improvement District. So there's going to be Sakura Square and K-Town and Little Saigon. I think that's exciting. That's exciting. And then re-envisioning Chinatown. And yeah, we're here to stay.
And I think something that we all can do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's in our home or in our work, is to not be afraid to have these conversations, not be afraid to ask difficult questions of people who are in power, people who have decision-making authority, whether that's in your home or your organization or in the larger world. But I think on a day-to-day basis, one of the things that I know that I want to commit to, and I'm trying to commit to more and plan on committing to more, is how do we integrate issues of equity and inclusion and diversity into our day-to-day work, into our day-to-day conversations, so it's not something that you check a box with or think about when it's the month of May, and so we focus on Asian Americans now. But how do we do this on a more consistent, long-term basis?
You know, because it is a month of May, the Asian Chamber has gotten so many requests to come and talk, come and do a presentation. The cultural groups have been asked to perform and all of that, and I keep telling them, yes, I will come and talk to you, but it doesn't have to be this month. Right. Let's do it in June. Let's do it in October. You know, let's do it all throughout the year.
Exactly.
And you know, kind of force that issue that it shouldn't be relegated to just.
And part of the cultural evolution or the cultural growth of our country, I think, is our businesses.
Yep.
And I think there's been a kind of a leadership vacuum in our country, but it's surprising how much business, big business, has stepped forward to start to lead in some of the changes that are important for all of our futures, and I think it's really big business also thinking about their own future success because of the changing country, but it's also a social conscience that is starting to develop as well in terms of what is good for society, and that is a real hopeful thing that has struck me, especially over the last year. One critical thing that's very meaningful is business has redefined their goals from maximizing shareholder value to addressing stakeholder issues in terms of the success of how big business sees their own success. And so I think that is a major change, and it's very hopeful in my mind. And so I think a combination of things have a good potential, to end up resulting in maybe where people are all working more toward the common good. And so
I absolutely agree that, you know, especially with these big corporations now, they have all turned to DEI. I think that's why the minority chambers have been so busy, because these big companies like Chase Bank and Wells Fargo and Excel and Comcast, they're coming to us now because there has been a cultural change within their corporate structure. So, yeah. And yeah, right, I think that's great, you know. It's gonna be good for them.
Yeah,
You know,
I
if they're
think that-
looking at at our population being one of the larger populations in 25 years, yeah.
And I think part of that process too is also making sure it's not performative.
Right.
They're just checking that box.
Yes.
That there's legitimate accountability.
Exactly. Mhm.
And not just in the moment, but over time.
Mhm. Mhm. It isn't just talking to the community, it means having a diverse staff,
Mhm.
having a diverse board, you know, having diverse advertising, yeah. And I totally see that. I didn't see that as a kid, so that's what makes me happy, is
Yeah,
that.
and if their brand
Mhm.
is going to come across as authentic to a diverse population,
We're gonna buy more.
yeah, or not,
Yeah, or not.
or
Yeah.
not. So
Mhm.
I think that may be a pretty compelling thing in the
Mhm.
future. And you know, it's a good thing. It's not a negative thing. It's a good thing.
Mhm.
So
Well, I'm really glad, I saw you on the thing yesterday, and I'm so glad to meet you in person, and as you as well. You know, I meet so many more Asians now, because, not just because of this month, but because of what's going on, and just exactly what we're talking about. So it's really great to talk to you.
yeah,
It's really great. Yeah.
glad that we did it within the context of Mile High United Way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am too. Like this conversation has been fantastic for me, just to meet you and then see you again, Charles, and just to have a space to be able to have some of these conversations and think about how we can continue to have these conversations within the context of Mile High United Way or in the context of the chamber. And so it's been a fantastic opportunity.